bienvenidas. Welcome, everyone. As I mentioned, tonight's event is available in Spanish and English. You can check the access to that with interpretation icon. Many thanks to our simultaneous interpreters. Este evento esta noche está disponible en español y puede acceder eso a la función haciendo clic en el icono interpretation. Muchas gracias a nuestras intérpretes simultáneas. My name is Melinda St. Louis, and I am the Director of Global Trade Watch at Public Citizen, and I'm thrilled to welcome you on behalf of Public Citizen, the United Steelworkers, and the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement to this evening's exciting virtual town hall, where we will be sharing news of recent important victories for Mexico's independent unions and the role of cross-border solidarity. As many of us know all too well, the fight for independent labor unions in Mexico has been long, bitter, and often deadly. Sadly, the original North America Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, exacerbated the race to the bottom in terms of wages and working conditions in the hemisphere. And its weak labor side agreement did nothing to meaningfully protect the rights of workers to organize independent unions in Mexico. When the NAFTA was renegotiated a few years ago, labor advocates on both sides of the border and allies in the US Congress fought hard to include new labor protections and innovative enforcement tools in the new US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or the USMCA. Since implementation of the USMCA in July of 2020, representatives from these independent unions in Mexico have attempted to utilize these new labor protections to support their organizing efforts in conjunction with US labor organizations, congressional allies, and legal experts. And in recent months, workers who have utilized these tools have won 3 significant organizing victories, with vast majorities voting in favor of joining independent unions at the Tridonex and Panasonic factories in Matamoros and the massive General Motors plant in Silao, despite facing continued dangers and threats. And just a couple of hours ago, the US Trade Representative announced it was asking Mexico to review whether workers at the Panasonic facility are being denied their rights in response to the recent petition filed by the independent union Sinitis and allies in the United States. So tonight we have an exciting panel of experts from the US and Mexico, including Representative Chuy García from Illinois and labor leaders from AFL-CIO, Sinitis, the United Steelworkers, and the American Economic Liberties Project, to share more about these labor rules, how they've played so far on the ground, and how we as US activists can support future struggles for labor rights and fair wages and dignified work in Mexico. We welcome your comments and questions. You can use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we ask that you please include your name and affiliation with your question. Our panelists will do their best to answer during the event, or we'll follow up with you afterward. And we will also make the live stream recording available in both languages after we conclude. So let's dive in. First, I am thrilled to welcome Representative Chuy García, who has served as the US Representative for Illinois' 4th Congressional District since 2019. And he has been a champion for labor rights on both sides of the border in the context of the USMCA. Before joining Congress, he served in the Illinois State Senate, the Cook County Board of Commissioners, and the Chicago City Council. Representative Garcia was born in Durango, Mexico, and his father worked in the US as part of the World War II era Bracero program. Representative Garcia, thank you so much for joining to kick us off and to share your insights about the significance of these labor protections and their implementation. Welcome. I think you're on mute.
Okay, there we are. Thank you so much y muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me join to discuss an issue of critical importance for workers on both sides of the border, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. As some of you may remember, I was very engaged with the NAFTA renegotiation process and ended up voting against the resulting USMCA because I wanted labor and environmental standards to be even stronger. Nevertheless, in the months leading up to implementation, I was not feeling very optimistic. Shortly before the House voted on the agreement, labor and environmental activist Oscar Hernandez Romero was disappeared in Mexico. This was after 3 of his colleagues had been disappeared and killed by anti-union vigilantes the previous year. And on the very day the agreement went into effect, the incredible Susana Prieto Terrazas, who joins us here today, was still in jail for fighting for the very labor rights that this agreement was supposed to protect. That being said, since the agreement went into effect, I've been a fierce advocate for ensuring that the labor protections that did make it into USMCA are enforced. For example, after the agreement was implemented, I led over 100 colleagues in sending a letter to President López Obrador. In the letter, we urged him to work with state governments to drop their politically motivated charges against Susana Prieto Terrazas and to work with state governments to ensure that they comply with the labor protections that were included in USMCA. We knew that if state governments in Mexico could willfully violate basic labor rights affirmed by USMCA, these protections could be rendered meaningless. That's why it was so important that Mexico also passed a reformed Ley Federal del Trabajo with a step-by-step implementation that concludes this year. These strengthen negotiating power for workers, increase the power of workers to elect their own union leaders, and protecting workers against gender discrimination and sexual violence. And in the US, though we haven't had all the legislative wins that we hoped for, there are some reasons for optimism. President Biden has made strong pro-labor appointments to several key positions, and the recently passed Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act extends prevailing wage protections to all energy infrastructure projects. But of course, the real reasons for hope are the extraordinary organizing successes of the past few months. I've been thrilled to see grassroots organizing efforts succeed against corporate giants like Amazon and Starbucks, and across the border, the incredible wins by the independent unions Cintia and Cenitis. I applaud everyone who contributed to those wins. However, it's important to point out that these successors are part of work very much still in progress. USMCA was an important improvement over NAFTA, but it should now serve as the floor, not the model for future negotiations and renegotiations of other trade agreements. The way forward for workers, for everyone really, is one of cross-border and intersectional solidarity, and I will continue standing with you. Thank you again for the invitation. I'm looking forward to seeing the entire presentation and conversation that will be taped tonight. Muchas gracias y muy buenas noches, y un saludo especial a Susana.
Thank you so much, Representative Garcia. We are so grateful for your continued leadership, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us tonight. Thank you so much. Now, I'm honored to welcome Eric Gottwald, who is a specialist on trade and economic globalization at the AFL-CIO, to share a bit more about these policy tools that we're talking about. Can you give us a better understanding of what the rapid response mechanism that was included in the USMCA is and how it's different from past labor enforcement systems in our trade deals?
Thanks, Melinda, and thanks first to Representative Garcia for helping organize this event, and of course the public citizen and Melinda. So buenas noches a todos. And I also want to thank Susana Prieto Terrazas, la diputada. It's so wonderful to see this transnational parliamentary exchange. We have support from both sides of the border for what we are trying to do, this cross-border solidarity, and that is a wonderful thing to see. So to your question, Melinda, the USMCA, part of the reason why at the end the AFL-CIO was able to support the USMCA first is the fact that we were looking to improve on an agreement, the NAFTA, or TEMEC, that everybody knows was a pretty big failure in terms of labor rights and respect for the environment. It was very good for multinational corporations, but it was not good for workers' rights. The workers' rights in that agreement were put in an unenforceable side agreement, as Melinda and Representative Garcia mentioned earlier. And so we saw an opportunity to upgrade what was an existing, frankly, terrible free trade agreement. So that is part of an important piece of context. The second thing I'd like to emphasize is when it comes to enforcing worker rights in trade agreements, the USMCA offered us a very important advance, this rapid response mechanism that we are here to discuss tonight. And I want everybody to understand how big of a leap forward that this mechanism is. Prior trade agreements that the US has signed, let's take, for example, the CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement. Of course, the CAFTA contained labor standards, but these were not enforceable against companies. They were only enforceable against governments. And the state-to-state enforcement mechanism was very slow and very cumbersome, and it's proven very difficult to use in practice. And I'll give you a very concrete example. We filed a complaint against Honduras almost 10 years ago, a country in which workers are denied the right to organize. And in this complaint, we identified a number of Honduran companies who were exporting to the US market and violating workers' rights, denying workers their right to form an independent trade union. And sadly, since we filed this complaint almost 10 years ago, all those companies we identified in the complaint continued to enjoy market access, full market access to the US market while this complaint has been pending for 10 years. So it has proven our normal dispute settlement mechanism in our trade agreements has proven to be not useful against private companies. And what we had to do in the USMCA was find a mechanism that was enforceable against individual companies and in a rapid way. And so we are able to do that with the rapid response mechanism. Anybody can file a petition against a company that is not living up to the USMCA's commitments to freedom of association and collective bargaining. And we've seen that these complaints now have been filed to the US government against now, I believe, four cases. And we've seen very good results in a very timely manner. And others on this call will talk about those individual cases. But just today, we had very good news from the USTR announcing that they're accepting the case against Panasonic that was filed by La Diputada Prieto and others. And we're very happy to see that this mechanism is working, and it's working to hold companies, individual companies, accountable in a very timely manner. And we've never had this before. So that's the big picture news here. And I'll let others fill in the details. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric, for that explanation. Now I'd like to turn it over to a message from Daniel Rangel, who is the research director of the Rethink Trade program at the American Economic Liberties Project. He was one of the lawyers that drafted the first stakeholder petition to activate the rapid response mechanism. And he also filed alongside Diputada Prieto the reset petition with Sinitis for the Panasonic facility that was just announced by US trade representatives. So Daniel will share a message both about the petition process and some of his observations from when he observed in Mexico.
Hi, thanks to Melinda and my former GTW colleagues for the invitation to participate in this event. It's really great to be able to share experiences with Congresspeople from both Mexico and the United States, and with our labor friends from both countries as well. Regretfully, I cannot join the discussion live, so I will keep my comments brief because I don't want to repeat a lot of what other speakers might cover. The last 12 months have showed us that when there's convergence of solid international standards a government committed to the enforcement of labor rights, and organizations willing to test those rules and authorities, meaningful advancements can be achieved in the global fight for workers' rights. Independent Union SNITIS, under the leadership of Susana Prieto Terrazas and the current Secretary General Maria del Rosario Moreno, has been a key actor of this first chapter of the fight under USMCA. Their endurance and committed activism have earned them the support of working people in Tamaulipas. You just have to talk to some of the Tamaulipecos to corroborate it. We all could attest this after the Tridonex filing and SNIT's resounding victory on February 28, which gave it the right to represent workers at this facility. That's why we, at Rethink Trade, were honored by the opportunity to partner up with SNITIS again to file the second rapid response petition before the U.S. government to incentivize Mexico and the U.S. to jointly hold Panasonic accountable for its labor rights abuses in Reynosa, Tamaulipas. There are signs that the wave is turning around, and workers are increasingly encouraged to speak up and fight for their rights. However, much more needs to be done. Certain corporations and local governments, including those that have been the target of rapid response petitions, have kept trying to avoid compliance with their commitments under the 2019 Mexican labor law, undermining workers' rights and interests. We will continue using the mechanism to make sure that filings and cases turn into actual changes for the livelihoods of Mexican workers and the development of a saner global economy. But if we are to end the deep-rooted system that has impoverished Mexican workers while undermining regular people in the United States, much more is needed. Groups from both sides of the border should reach out, use the mechanism, file complaints, and use the hotline that the Department of Labor has set up. Only through swift and effective cooperation of binational coalitions we will be able to bring the changes that we all want to see in the region. Thanks.
Thanks so much to Daniel and for his activist lawyering, which has been really important for this struggle. But now I'm very, very honored to welcome Susana Prieto Terrazas, diputada, who is also a lawyer for the Sindicato Nacional Independiente de Trabajadores de Industrias y Servicios, SINITIS, which launched a successful strike wave in 2019, as has been shared, that won pay raises for maquiladora workers in the states of Tamaulipas and Chihuahua. SINITIS recently won union elections at Tridonex and Panasonic plants, despite attempts to subvert their right to do so. And Susana and SINITIS have been organizing for years amidst significant threats, intimidation, and repression, as has already been mentioned. And it's been truly inspiring to see several of their campaigns make headway in recent months, recognizing there still is a long way to go. Muchas gracias por compartir con nosotras, Susana, sobre las campañas organizativas y cómo podemos seguir apoyando desde Estados Unidos el esfuerzo de organizar sindicatos independientes en México. Welcome.
Gracias, Melinda, ¿sí me escuchan? Muchas gracias a todos, al representante Chuy García, quien sin su compromiso yo creo que jamás hubiese salido de la cárcel de Tamaulipas. Esa insistencia que tuvo siempre con los congresistas de Estados Unidos, viendo sobre mi caso personal de persecución política por defender trabajadores para que pudieran tener libertad y democracia sindical. Muchas gracias por siempre, en mi corazón y en el de mi familia, representante. Gracias a Ben Davis. ¿Cómo olvidar ese gran apoyo que tuve de Ben Davis, este abogado de este sindicato de acereros en Estados Unidos? Eric Goldman, bueno, pues a Eric Goldman lo acabo de conocer, pero cuando hablo de AFL-CIO me recuerdo a Richard Trumka, me recuerdo que el apartado 23 del TEMEC existe por Richard Trumka y por este gran equipo de trabajo de los cuales formaba parte también ya Eric Goldman, en Kathy, en mucha gente que nos ha ayudado tantísimo a los trabajadores de México. Cómo no agradecer al Centro de Solidaridad que también los compañeros nos ayudan tantísimo en México. Ryan siempre presente en Public Citizen desde que formaban parte de esta organización. Daniel Rangel y Lori, que fueron quienes me ayudaron a interponer la primera queja por violaciones al apartado 23, por violar los derechos de libertad y democratización sindical en México en la planta Tridonex. Tampoco lo olvidaremos jamás. Quizás los resultados no han sido los que esperamos, pero como bien lo ha dicho en otras oportunidades el congresista y todos nosotros, el derecho siempre es perfectible, y este derecho incorporado a favor de los trabajadores de los 3 países, México, Estados Unidos y Canadá, en el apartado 23 del TEMEC, debe hacerse efectivo. Y cuando los trabajadores de Estados Unidos y Canadá requieran o han requerido del apoyo de los trabajadores de México, ellos no lo han dudado, como los trabajadores de General Motors, como apoyaron la huelga de los trabajadores de General Motors en Estados Unidos. Se han dado muchos, bueno, tengo que agradecer también, porque hoy es un día de gran celebración para nosotros en la lucha de los trabajadores, porque se ha aceptado la tercera queja por violaciones al apartado 23 del TEMEC, y yo no puedo dejar de reconocer el trabajo de este gran abogado, Daniel Rangel, un joven talentoso y activista que la verdad eriza la piel que gente tan joven, como lo ha dicho el presidente de México, sean para nosotros, los que hemos luchado por tantos años, la promesa del relevo generacional. Gracias a Daniel Rangel, siempre interesado, siempre detrás de mí, siempre traduciendo, siempre pendiente, y a Lori, que ahora pertenecen a alguna otra organización. Yo tenía entendido que era Rethink Commerce, pero ahorita vi que es Rethink Trade. Estoy confundida, entonces como a cualquiera de las dos organizaciones que sea el nombre correcto, siempre gracias a Daniel Rangel y a Lori por su compromiso, porque esto no se logra de ninguna manera solo por la intervención de Susana Prieto y de todos nosotros. El ingrediente más importante, más allá de congresistas, de diputados y de activistas, para estos grandes logros que se han tenido con el apoyo de esta familia que somos Estados Unidos y México, ha sido el sacrificio de trabajadores y trabajadoras que siguen sin trabajo, que están boletinados, porque el gran poder que tienen los sindicatos blancos de este país es que tienen el control de la mayoría de las empresas, los despiden de una y las empresas discriminan a los trabajadores que luchan. Es decir, si tú por tu número de seguro social vienes de Tridonex o de Panasonic, no te doy trabajo en ninguna otra empresa. Quiero que Estados Unidos sepa que tenemos grandes problemas. Ahorita tenemos 21 familias de Panasonic, 2 de ellas con 2 trabajadores que no pueden laborar. La gente de los porros de la CTM los golpearon a tubazos los días 18 y 19 de abril. La elección fue el 21 y 22 en Panasonic y ganamos por una arrolladora mayoría del 85% de los votos, y aún así golpearon a los trabajadores para que no votaran a favor de Snitis, y aún así los trabajadores, con el voto libre, directo y secreto, se empoderaron, se solidarizaron con estos trabajadores golpeados, despedidos y boletinados, y prácticamente fue unánime la decisión de que dejaran el sindicato de la CTM. Las cosas no son tan rápidas como nosotros queremos. Ellos tienen todo el dinero del mundo. Ganamos también por una arrolladora mayoría, porque la gente tiene fe en el trabajo que todos nosotros como activistas estamos haciendo, y tiene fe y esperanza de mejores salarios, de mejores condiciones de vida, de una vida con respeto por parte de los patrones y de sus representantes sindicales, y que estos realmente los representen a ellos y dejen de ser el brazo derecho de los departamentos de recursos humanos de las empresas, para que ellos y sus hijos puedan tener esperanzas de un mejor futuro. Yo creo que es importante que sepan Pues sí, estamos muy contentos, los trabajadores de Panasonic, los de Convec, los de muchas empresas, que tendré que corregirte un poco, Melinda. Panasonic está en Reynosa, Tamaulipas. Quiere decir que la lucha que iniciamos en Matamoros se ha extendido a otras ciudades. Ya es Reynosa, Tamaulipas, y antes las empresas corruptas y los sindicatos corruptos amenazaban a las autoridades con irse de la plaza a otra plaza donde les permitieran violar derechos humanos y laborales. Y quiere decir que esta semilla que estamos sembrando en tanto joven activista y el despertar al conocimiento de los derechos de los trabajadores y su forma de ejercitarlos está permeando en los trabajadores. Las empresas ya no van a decir, me voy a Chihuahua porque en Tamaulipas está difícil la cosa, los trabajadores se defienden con uñas y dientes. No, queremos, el propósito es que Chihuahua, que Baja California Norte, Baja California Sur, que Sonora, Sinaloa y los 32 estados de la República tomen la misma actitud, porque no están cometiendo ningún delito, aunque las autoridades hasta el día de hoy sigan criminalizándonos, sigan diciendo que somos criminales por pelear por los derechos de los trabajadores. Tengo una mala noticia para ustedes. En Tridonex, aunque ganamos, aunque obtuvimos un laudo que dice que somos el sindicato mayoritario SNITIS, se ampararon en contra de esa resolución y la autoridad federal, ahora no pueden decir que es el gobernador de Tamaulipas, la autoridad federal les concedió la suspensión de la resolución. Les dijo, depositen $1 millón de fianza y los dejamos que sigan administrando el contrato colectivo hasta que se resuelva el amparo en definitiva. Nosotros interpusimos un recurso de queja en contra de esto y también solicitamos una contrafianza. Estábamos esperanzados de que la contrafianza fuera mucho más barata, dado el 85% de los trabajadores votando a favor de SNITIS y el 15% a favor de la CTM, que ahora es el sindicato minoritario, pero no. Nos pusieron una contrafianza de más de $1 millón, superior a la que le pusieron a la CTM cuando tenemos trabajadores que tienen 3 años sin trabajar, cuando no hemos logrado un solo centavo de cuota sindical y cuando hay tanto trabajador boletinado, golpeado, herido, que no ha podido conseguir trabajo. Hemos avanzado mucho en la lucha y son grandes victorias esto que hemos señalado en este programa, que podría considerarse como informativo para los trabajadores, que sigan motivándose y que sigan luchando, pero también decirles que no es fácil, que nosotros no dejamos de luchar como abogados, como activistas un solo segundo, que seguimos interponiendo recursos hasta que se logre cristalizar el sueño, pero los trabajadores luego son desesperados y luego empiezan a decir, pero ya ganamos. ¿Cómo que si ganamos, entonces todavía sigue el sindicato de la CTM aquí? Y empieza a haber una decepción de trabajadores. Primero por la desesperación de la necesidad económica que tienen. Yo he pensado en hacer un GoFundMe o algo similar para los trabajadores que fueron golpeados de Panasonic, pero la empresa Panasonic sigue defendiendo un contrato colectivo de trabajo ilegal que hizo con la CTM. Yo creo que eso fue la causa definitiva que orilló al Departamento del Trabajo de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica, aunado a todas las pruebas que aportamos, de convencerse de que continúan en México la violación a los derechos de los trabajadores, pero decirle a los trabajadores y trabajadoras de los 3 países que no vamos a dar un paso atrás hasta que se les haga justicia. Gracias por invitarme, gracias por su apoyo siempre, y gracias por su activismo y por este mensaje y esta actualización a los trabajadores de los 3 países.
Wow, muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much, Diputada Prieto Terrazas, and for everything that you are doing personally and how you are supporting labor organizing across Mexico. It's truly inspiring, and thank you for all that you do. And thank you for being with us tonight.
It's
Now I
my
would
pleasure.
thank you, thank you. Now I'd like to invite Jeff Hermanson, who has a deep history coordinating work between U.S. unions and independent and democratic labor unions in Mexico through the Solidarity Center, which is allied with AFL-CIO. Jeff works closely with workers from the National Independent Union for Workers in the Automotive Industry, or CINTIA, at General Motors in Silao, Mexico. So he can share some details from the ground about their efforts and the recent victories there as well. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, and good evening, brothers and sisters, compañeros y compañeros. The workers at General Motors in Silao have had a long struggle to rid themselves of a company protection contract with the CTM, run by Tereso Medina, the same person that really controls the CTM in Coahuila, where SNITIS is struggling. The workers first had a vote to legitimate or get rid of their contract on April 21st last year. And that election, that vote had to be suspended when the ballot boxes that were stored in the union office were found the next morning to have been broken into and ballots destroyed. An unofficial count of the ballots that had been cast in the first day of the election showed that the CTM was losing 45 to 55%. This became the subject of a rapid response complaint filed by the USTR without even waiting for a union complaint. There was an agreement reached with the Secretary of Labor in Mexico to hold a second vote with international observers. That vote was held on August 19th. And again, the workers rejected the CTM protection contract by a vote of 55% to 45%. Soon thereafter, CINTIA, the independent union of workers of the automotive industry, filed for representation of the workers. 3 other unions also got on the ballot. We don't know how they got the 30% necessary to get on the ballot, since none of them had been around in the past in Silao and General Motors. But a vote was held against those 3 unions, one of which was openly a CTM union, one of which was claiming to be independent but was controlled by the CTM, and a third that we don't know where they came from. They got 18 votes, that third union. CINTIA got 76% of the vote of the 6,500 General Motors workers on the 2nd of February. They began negotiating on April 12th after being certified as the bargaining unit representative of General Motors Silao. They bargained hard. General Motors bargained hard, advised by Littler Mendelsohn, an anti-union law firm. But CINTIA really had the support of the workers. I mean, that was so apparent. And as a result, they reached agreement on May the 10th. And the tentative agreement will be put up for a ratification vote on May 25th. The agreement they reached was a decent agreement, a good agreement. It's a salary increase of 8.5%, which is above inflation, the first time that this has happened in that General Motors factory. They also got a benefit increase of 2%, and the total economic impact is 13.5%. Significantly above the 7.5% inflation rate. They've got additional productivity bonuses, attendance bonuses, food coupons, which is a common benefit in Mexico, another day's pay for the year-end bonus, seniority increases. They've got a very important benefit is that in temporary shutdowns, which are quite common, they'll get paid 75% of their salary. They got some non-economic bonuses, a labor management commission to study firings, a labor management commission to study productivity, production changes, the speed of the assembly line. The Seglo subcontractor that's been incorporated into the General Motors plant, those workers' seniority will be recognized. And there'll be work tables set up, labor management work tables set up to study how to recuperate the real wages lost over the last 26 years. Real wages have declined in Mexico for 30 some years. And this plant, which has existed for 26 years, because of these protection contracts and wage increases below the rate of inflation, real wages in that plant have been going down for 26 years. Now they're finally going to turn around and start recuperating the lost wages and hopefully getting big wage increases. But the biggest gain of all is that Cynthia got a contract, a decent contract, after all these years of being held hostage by the CTM. And it's a great victory. It's going to have tremendous impact on auto workers, and workers in manufacturing throughout the country are beginning to show their rebellion against these protection contracts. So it really is a great victory. And adding a fourth independent union at one of the 23 auto assembly plants in Mexico is also a tremendous achievement. So it's a great time to be an organizer in Mexico.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jeff. You know, I think for many of us who have been trade activists for a long time, to actually hear about trade tools being used that and having some concrete impact on the ground is quite thrilling. So it's something that I think we, it's still a work in progress, but I think it's quite exciting to be able to figure out how we can utilize these tools, but mostly to support the incredible organizing that's happening on the ground. Finally, I'd like to turn it over to Ben Davis, who is the International Affairs Director for the United Steelworkers Union, represents 850,000 workers in the US and Canada. Ben has been working in cross-border solidarity for many, many years, and he's a terrific person to round out our panel to share how the US labor movement has worked to build stronger ties with Mexican workers and how critical it is to use this mechanism and other mechanisms in the USMCA and elsewhere to continue fighting for labor rights alongside Mexico's independent labor movement. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Melinda. Thanks very much, and good evening to everybody. Un saludo especial a la diputada, y muchas felicidades. Congratulations on the decision of the U.S. government to proceed with the Panasonic case filing. I think that's very important. We're going to watch that case very closely as it develops. Three things I'd like to say. First, and I think
muy de cerca según se vaya.
Oh, no, I'm hearing the interpreter. I shouldn't be hearing the interpreter. Okay, thanks.
No debería estar escuchando a la intérprete.
Yeah, I'm still hearing. Should I go ahead, Melinda? Or? Okay. First point, the demand for justice from workers in Mexico exceeds the supply. That's not news to anybody who's been paying attention over the last 30 years, as people have been pointed out. But these cases really, and the overwhelming majorities that independent worker organizations have won when fair conditions are finally, or close to fair conditions are finally available, really shows that it's not that people have accepted or believe in the institutions or the ideologies that have been talked about. How tripartism. Tripartism is not bad in some contexts, but the Mexican brand of tripartism has basically been used to keep workers down. And the truth is, they never bought into that. They never believed in that. And the first cases, obviously, we have 3 cases so far. That's not a big enough sample to draw definitive conclusions, but the numbers are pretty impressive. 75, 80, 90% of workers, when they finally get a chance to have a free and fair vote, are voting for independent unions, not for the protection unions, not for the company-based unions, but for organizations that they think will give them a real voice. So that's important. And it's very encouraging for those of us, and as been pointed out, not everybody in this webinar was a supporter of USMCA. Not everyone thought that the mechanism was going to work. We were one of the unions that did support it. So it's encouraging, but it's way too early to draw conclusions from 3 cases. Okay, so we really need to make this to consolidate this whole process. But it's a good start. The second point is that, along those lines, there are some, even with the cases that we've seen so far, there are some significant problems that we've got to pay attention to. I mean, it's already been pointed out that in several of these cases, there were violations, there were threats, workers were beaten, workers were fired. Some of the workers who've been fired have not gotten their jobs back. Leaders of the unions, the GM union, were threatened. It was very difficult to get independent observers into these elections. So the victories that you saw or you heard about happened despite some of these factors, and are really a testimony to the courage of the workers and the leaders like Alejandra Morales at GM, whose life was threatened and whose family was threatened, and who did not back down and continued to demand justice. The second thing I'd say is going a little bit beyond just the elections for a second. We're coming up. We're 3 years into the 4-year process of the labor law reform. There are a minimum of 80,000 collective bargaining agreements that have to be reviewed and voted on. And so far, 4,000 votes have been held. And we're coming up to a situation where, a lot of people a lot of workers are not going to have a chance to have a free and fair vote. And I think people watching this are very concerned that the government, the employers will try to extend this process probably into the next government, hoping that whoever comes after López Obrador will give them a better deal. It's a very limited delivery so far. There's been some great examples, but the vast majority of workers who are eligible to have a free and fair vote have not been able to have it so far. So we gotta stay on top of that. And the third thing is that I think we've seen some significant not only legal support but economic support from the U.S. Department of Labor for independent worker organizations in Mexico, but frankly, not nearly enough to do the job that needs to be done, because you have a vast, millions, tens of millions of workers who have been denied justice, as Jeff said, for decades, and it's not a 2 or 3 year process to overcome that. And so we very much hope that the Congress will keep an eye on that, and especially while we have a progressive Congress, and hope that continues, but we don't know. So we need to institutionalize this process as quickly and as effectively as we can, because this is not a short-term battle. And then just finally, I concur completely with what Jeff was saying at the end, that the real test, the real measure of success is are the wages of Mexican workers going to go up, and we're particularly concerned about workers in the manufacturing sector. They've gone down for a long time in both real terms and relative to that of those of workers in the US. And that creates a fundamentally unfair situation. It's not fair to Mexican workers to have to work. GM workers, prior to this contract, $2.35 an hour, working 48 hours a week. When their counterparts in the US make at least 10 times that much. And there's the work isn't different, the layout of the plant isn't different, the machinery isn't different. So it's just pure exploitation. And it hurts the Mexican workers most of all and their families, but it also hurts our members. It also hurts workers in the US. And that's why we fought for enforceable worker rights mechanisms and trade agreements. That's why we think USMCA is, a good start, but it needs to be stronger, and it needs to be, these mechanisms need to be a lot broader. They need to be in every trade agreement, and they need to be in other mechanisms as well, with countries that we don't have trade agreements with, so that the same rights are available to workers that produce goods that come into the U.S. market, wherever in the world they might be. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ben, for those words. And, I just thank you so much to all of our panelists. Muchísimas gracias. A special thanks to Representative Chuy García and for Diputada Susana Prieto Terrazas, and our tireless interpreters, Kathy Ogle and Sandra Tapia. I want to thank them as well. Before turning it over to some questions that have come in, I just want to underline how inspired I am by the incredible labor organizing efforts by Sinitis and Cynthia, and the courage, really the courage of Mexican workers to demand their rights, often at great personal risk. Well, hopefully, as we've heard, the rapid response mechanism in the USMCA can be an important tool to compel positive change. It really will require consistent and creative cross-border solidarity to create the space needed for these and future independent organizing efforts to result in sustained improvements for labor rights on the ground. So again, before I turn over to questions, thanks to everyone to show up for this webinar. It's an important first step, but we also encourage you to sign up for our USMCA rapid response alert list to stay in the loop during future RRM cases or other urgent situations that require international solidarity efforts with workers in Mexico. Andy will throw in the chat the link, so please do sign up to be a part, to stay in the loop, so that this can be the beginning, certainly not the end. So if you have any questions, we have a few minutes before the hour, so feel free to ask them by typing in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please include your name and affiliation when you ask those questions. And so there are a couple that have come in that I can perhaps throw open to the panel. One is from Carl Kramer from the San Francisco Living Wage Coalition. His question is, what can be done from the United States to support the return to their jobs of workers such as Israel Cervantes, who were fired for their union activities at the General Motors plants in Silao? Jeff, do you have an answer for that?
I know that a number of folks have been making contributions to the work of the Casa Obrera del Bajío, which is led by Israel Cervantes. And I think through the Mexico Solidarity Project or Labor Notes, those are two organizations that I know have done some fundraising. But I think even more important would be talking with locals of your trade unions and the local central labor councils, and getting resolutions passed, and promoting the idea that supporting Mexican workers is supporting American workers. We really have common interests here. We've got to see wages raised. Otherwise, the race to the bottom is going to continue. And so, you know, we're not going to raise wages in Mexico to US levels overnight, but we can begin to raise the bottom instead of racing to the bottom. And I think that's, it's very important that US unions, the locals, central labor councils begin to understand that our interests are linked with Mexican workers.
Anyone else want to jump in to that question? We have another question from Joseph Goebbels from Ottawa, the Trade Justice Network. And so his question is about, since Sanitis has won the election at the Panasonic plant, the question is, what will the rapid response mechanism case seek to accomplish? Does it just put the breach of rights on the record, or will it help to ensure that they negotiate in good faith, or something else? Susana, do you have an answer to that?
Voy a hablar un poco más despacio porque la intérprete se quejó.
Ay, perdón.
Hablo muy rápido. Yo creo que ayudando un poco a Jeffery a responder esta pregunta tan difícil que nos hacen, porque pareciera fácil. Reincorporar a Israel a su trabajo, a los 21 trabajadores de Panasonic, a los 600 trabajadores de Tridonex, es imposible por la soberbia de las empresas. Son malos perdedores. Su única corona para seguir golpeando a quien quiera levantarse a luchar por sus derechos es mantener a Israel, a Sonia, a Alberto, a Ramón, a María, a Rosario sin trabajo. Esa es una venganza cruel que viola todo derecho humano. Ahorita, por ejemplo, Panasonic dice, yo no puedo reinstalarlos a menos que una autoridad me lo diga. Y cuando ganamos los juicios y les ordenan reinstalarlos, dicen, ¿cuánto te pago? Pero no lo reinstalan. Él no vuelve a trabajar aquí. Y luego, a través de los líderes patronales, que son la Coparmex, la Canacintra, Index, boletinan a los trabajadores. A veces no se conforman con la ciudad, en el estado o en el país, para que si defienden sus derechos, nadie más vuelva a levantarse. Es como en las haciendas, en los tiempos del porfiriato, la dictadura en México. Un campesino no quiere trabajar, a la horca, y ahí deja su cadáver. No lo sepultes, que lo vean siempre y que se acuerden cuando no quieran trabajar esas jornadas exhaustivas, sin salario, sin alimento, que el que se niegue a trabajar va a ser ahorcado. Hoy en el siglo XXI, cuando yo estaba presa, muchas veces antes de ir presa, en las plazas públicas, sobre todo en la de Matamoros, le dije a los trabajadores, hay muchas formas de morir. Mucha gente dice que el mayor bien jurídico tutelado que tenemos los seres humanos es la vida. Yo digo que es la libertad. Sin libertad no hay vida. Estás muerto en vida. Por eso a mí no me mataron, me quitaron mi libertad. A los trabajadores de la industria maquiladora o de cualquier otra empresa, porque todas actúan por imitación, los despiden y le dices, ahí tienes el ejemplo de rebelión. No volverás a tener trabajo ni podrás mantener a tu familia en consecuencia. Y no solo te voy a matar a ti de a poco, voy a matar a toda tu familia. Díganme ustedes quién se revela ante esa amenaza de forma pacífica. Es mi respuesta.
Thank you very much for those very powerful words. We are coming up on the end. Perhaps let me just throw out one of the last questions, which is from Ian Robinson from the Hudson Valley Central Labor Council for AFL-CIO. And so the question is, with so many elections still to come, is it 80,000 still to come, if he heard Ben correctly? Will we be stretched so thin that we can't support more than a few of these? And so does anyone have any kind of concluding thoughts about kind of ways to use the rapid response mechanism, given the huge number of contracts? And I'll throw it open if somebody would like to answer that. Ben, go ahead.
I think it's not as much about how we use the mechanism, but recognizing that this mechanism is a tool, but it's not a panacea. It's not by itself going to change the relations between labor and capital in Mexico. That has to be done by the workers, right? And for a long time, there's been a very heavy foot on the scale. And I think that if the rapid response mechanism and other elements of USMCA are used the way that we intended, that there's going to be less pressure on the scale and more opportunity for workers to stand up and exercise the rights, which these initial cases have shown they want to do, they know how to do. Workers aren't stupid. They know they're being exploited, right? But they have relatives in the U.S. They're very well informed about the situation. The problem is that there is no political space, or hasn't been, for workers to organize without facing firing and murder and all these consequences. So that's really the question. Rapid response is not the panacea. It's, I would argue, an important piece of the solution. The employers have a strategy here too, right? And I think it's, first of all, is to try and drag this process out as long as it can, and get past the López Obrador government, in the hope that whoever comes after López Obrador is not going to be as good as him. And frankly, whoever comes after Biden is not going to be as good as him. Then they can take back some of the territory that they've had to lose. A second argument that you're hearing from the employers is, well, maybe this isn't so bad, because historically the options in Mexico have been between employer-dominated, have been to have, the strategy's been to have employer-dominated unions, but maybe we can get rid of the employer-dominated unions and just have no unions. And there are management side lawyers that are strongly arguing that the union-free option is the direction that they should follow, and that kind of ties in with the first piece. So this is not a fight that's over. This is a fight that is only just beginning. The rapid response mechanism is a piece of that, but the fight is going to be how workers in Mexico can organize, hopefully, like Jeff said, with the support of workers in Canada, workers in the United States, we're going to have to keep on fighting.
Thank you so much. Well, we've come up to the end of our time, and I want to once again thank all of you for joining us, and all of our panelists, and a special thank you to Susana for joining us as well for this important conversation. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up with you afterward, and please do sign up to be a part of the USMCA Rapid Response Alert List so that we can stay in touch and be able to work together creatively and with passion in support of independent labor union organizing in Mexico. So thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful evening and take care.